The silence of space was suffocating. The horizon drifted in the darkness, its hull scarred from the brutal skirmish that had just transpired. Only the dim glow of the remaining emergency lights illuminated the damaged corridors. Captain Valeria Stone stood at the front of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the view ahead. Earth, once vibrant with life and the pulse of humanity's future, now lay in ruin. Its atmosphere burned with the evidence of the Nixar Dominion's assault. Massive, swarming ships that had obliterated the planet's defenses within days. Humanity's last hope was a single warship, her warship, and the broken remnants of her crew. Report. Valeria's voice cut through the silence, firm, despite the exhaustion that threatened to overtake her. Commander Lang, standing beside her at the tactical console, looked up with a weary expression. We've pushed the Nixar back for now, but it won't last long. Their fleet's pulling back, probably regrouping. We've sustained major damage to the engines and weapons array. Valeria's brow furrowed, eyes scanning the readouts. It was true. The horizon had nearly been torn apart by the battle. Yet, in a surprising twist, they had managed to land a critical strike against the Nixar flagship, forcing its retreat. It was a victory, but one at a terrible cost. The ship's forward hull was riddled with holes, exposed to the vacuum of space in several places. Life support systems had gone offline in multiple sectors, and the crew was down by almost half. There was no time to mourn, no time to rest. They were still alive, and as long as they were, they had a chance to keep fighting. The horizon isn't going to last much longer if we don't make repairs, Lang added, his voice edged with concern. We need to find a safe harbor, a place to regroup. Valeria's hand clenched into a fist at her side. She couldn't afford to lose hope, not now. Where's the nearest colony? She asked, her eyes narrowing as the map of the galaxy flickered to life on the holoscreen. Lieutenant Marek, the communications officer, spoke up from his station. Nova Terra. It's not far, but it's fractured. There's been word of civil unrest there. If we go, we risk losing what little we have left. We don't know who we can trust. Valeria turned sharply toward Marek, the weight of her decision already pressing on her chest. They had no choice. The Nixar had torn Earth apart, but humanity still had colonies, and if she didn't act fast, those would fall too. Nova Terra was the closest, and it might be the only place left where they could rebuild. We go. Nova Terra is our best chance. Get us to that sector now. A murmur of uncertainty spread across the bridge, but there was no time to discuss alternatives. The crew was tired, scared, but they were survivors. They had to keep moving forward. Captain, there's something else. Commander Lang hesitated, glancing at the tactical display again. We're picking up an unknown transmission, an encrypted signal. It's not from the Nixar. It's human. Valeria's pulse quickened. Another human signal. After all that had happened, after Earth's fall, she hadn't expected any more survivors. Patch it through. The static crackled for a moment, then a voice emerged, deep and otherworldly, yet unmistakably human. This is the Celery outpost. We have a proposal, a weapon. If you wish to survive, come to us. Valeria's heart raced. That Celery were a myth, an ancient race said to have aided humanity in the past. But this? A weapon capable of saving them. She had no choice but to follow the lead, no matter how desperate it seemed. Set a course for the Celery outpost, she ordered, her voice resolute, and prepare for anything. As the ship's engines hummed back to life, the horizon surged forward, its path uncertain. But one thing was clear. Valeria Stone wasn't going to let humanity's light go out in the dark of space. The stars outside the bridge window blurred into streaks of light as the horizon entered hyperspace. Captain Valeria Stone stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her face drawn with exhaustion, but her mind braced. The unknown transmission from the celery had shaken her to her core. A weapon, an ancient, powerful force capable of shifting the balance of war. Could they truly trust these mysterious aliens? Could she? There was no time for second-guessing. They had been given a chance, however fleeting. Captain, we're on course for the Celery outpost. Estimated arrival, 24 hours. Commander Lang's voice broke through her thoughts. Valeria nodded absently, her gaze still fixed on the glowing expanse of space. Good. Let's make sure we're ready for anything. Lang hesitated before speaking again, his voice soft with concern. There's something else, Captain. We've been receiving faint transmissions from other human colonies in this sector. But we've also intercepted distress signals. Some of them are reports of unrest, sabotage. We're not the only ones struggling. Valeria turned to face him, her expression hardening. What kind of unrest? The colonies are splintering, Captain. Rival factions, ideological conflicts, resource wars. It's like the Nixer invasion has torn the fabric of human unity to shreds. Some colonies are even fighting each other for control of the last remaining resources. Lang's eyes flickered to the tactical console. We may have to face more than just the Nixer. We could find ourselves in the middle of a human civil war. Valeria clenched her jaw. It was what she feared most, a fractured humanity, struggling to survive, but unwilling to unite. She had seen the cracks forming before the invasion, but this was worse than she could have imagined. If she couldn't unite these colonies, humanity would fall, not to the Nixer, but to its own divisiveness. We can't afford infighting, Valeria said, her voice cold. Send a message to all human colonies in the sector. Tell them we're coming, and they need to make a choice, join us, or be left behind. As Lang nodded and relayed the orders, Valeria turned to the rest of her bridge crew, her eyes lingering on each one of them. Every member of her team was a survivor, tested and tried in ways she hadn't expected. But they were her family now. They had no choice but to face whatever came next, together. Hours passed in tense silence, the hum of the horizon's engines the only sound in the cold, metal heart of the ship. Valeria couldn't shake the feeling that they were headed into unknown territory. The Celery's offer was too convenient, too strange. And yet, what other choice did they have? A weapon, a true weapon capable of destroying the Nixer or changing the course of the war. It was an opportunity she couldn't let slip by. Suddenly, the alarms blared, cutting through the stillness. Captain, incoming, 2 Nixer ships. They're intercepting us. Marek's voice rang out in alarm. Valeria's pulse quickened, but her training kicked in. There was no time to hesitate. The Horizon's engines roared to life, and the ship veered hard to the left, narrowly avoiding the first blast of energy from the oncoming Nixer ships. The Horizon was not in any shape to fight, but Valeria was determined not to go down without a fight. Raise shields. All crew to battle stations. She barked, striding toward the command console. Lang, can we outrun them? Commander Lang's fingers flew across the controls. We're too damaged, Captain. They'll catch us in minutes. Valeria's mind raced. She needed a plan, a way out. Her hand hovered over the tactical screen, her mind calculating their options. The nearest colony was too far, and a retreat would only guarantee the Nixer's pursuit. But then something clicked. Prepare for a jump to hyperspace. But we're going to jump blind, Valeria ordered. Lang shot her a confused look. "Captain, we don't have time to calibrate the coordinates. We'll end up in the middle of a star orb. We don't have time for safety." "Do it." Valeria snapped. "I'll make sure they don't follow." As the bridge erupted into action, Valeria's mind focused. That Celery might have the key to humanity's survival, but it was up to her to get them there. The Nixar couldn't stop her, not today. She leaned over the railing of the command center, hands gripping tightly. The horizon shuddered as the engines powered up, then, with a flash, the stars outside were replaced with the swirling chaos of hyperspace. For a brief moment, it felt like the universe itself held its breath. But then the horizon lurched, and Valeria's heart skipped a beat as the ship slammed into something, an invisible force that seemed to push back against them. "Captain, the Nixar are still following us," Lang shouted. Valeria's eyes widened. They'd jumped blind, but there was no way the Nixar should have been able to track them so fast. Something was wrong. The ship lurched again, but this time it wasn't just the gravitational forces of hyperspace. It was that Celery. They had been watching, and now it was time to face them. "Prepare for contact," Valeria said, the weight of what was about to happen sinking into her bones. "We're not alone in this galaxy anymore." The horizon lurched again, this time accompanied by a deep, vibrating hum that seemed to ripple through the hull. The hyperspace tunnel flickered, its twisting lights distorting as if reality itself was pulling at the ship. Valeria's grip tightened on the railing, the tremors reverberating through her bones. She glanced at Lang, whose face was pale, eyes wide in disbelief. "What the hell is happening?" He shouted over the growing cacophony. "I don't know," Valeria answered through gritted teeth, her mind racing. They had jumped blind to escape the Nixar, but this wasn't what she expected. This wasn't just an ordinary hyperspace anomaly. This felt deliberate. The ship's alarms blared, signaling a sharp deviation from their course. Marek's voice crackled through the comms, barely audible over the noise. "Captain, we're losing control. The gravitational pull from something massive, something unnatural, is pulling us in." "Brace for impact," Valeria shouted, but before she could even give the order, the horizon shuddered violently. There was a sudden and jarring weightlessness as the ship dropped out of hyperspace, the familiar stars of the galaxy vanishing, replaced by a vast alien space, an enormous, uncharted void. "Where the hell are we?" Lang asked, eyes glued to the empty expanse on the view screen. The silence in the room was deafening. No other ships. No signs of life. Just the void. Then, on the edge of the horizon's sensors, a faint but unmistakable signal appeared. "It's Nova Terra," Marek said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "The signal is coming from there." Valeria stood, taking the information in quickly. She stared at the display, where the system's data showed a single planet. Nova Terra, the world that had once been a thriving human colony, now a place of rumors and disarray. But something was off. The system wasn't as she remembered it. The planet seemed different. "Lang, adjust our trajectory. We're going in." Despite the sudden appearance of a strange anomaly, there was no other choice. Nova Terra was their only lead. Valeria's mind, sharp as ever, fought to block out the unsettling feeling crawling up her spine. Something was wrong with this system, and she knew the Nixar couldn't have been far behind. Hours later, the horizon entered the atmosphere of Nova Terra. The city lights below flickered like dying embers. What had once been a shining example of human achievement now seemed like a ghost town. Valeria frowned as she watched the swirling clouds of smoke and debris rising from the surface. The planet's surface was ravaged, marked with scars of violent conflict. Civil war had torn through the colonies, splintering them into warring factions. A broadcast came through on their comms. It was garbled at first, but soon a distorted face appeared on the screen, an older man, his eyes wild with panic. "Horizon, this is Governor Merrick of Nova Terra. You must not land here. The planet is lost. We've seen what happens to those who come. The Nixar are everywhere. They have infiltrated us from within. We've been fighting ourselves for resources, for power. You're walking into a slaughterhouse." The message cut off abruptly. The crew exchanged worried glances, but Valeria remained stoic, her face unreadable. Governor Merrick's words confirmed what they feared. Nova Terra wasn't just struggling with the Nixar. It was a war zone, a place where human factions had turned on one another in the chaos of the invasion. "Captain," Lang said quietly, "what do we do? The people here are fractured. If we land, we're walking into a civil war." Valeria's gaze hardened as she stared at the map of the planet. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but if she didn't act, they would be at risk of losing everything. The Horizon was in no condition to fight off another attack, and she had no intention of letting Nova Terra slip through humanity's fingers. "We're going in," Valeria said, her voice firm. "We can't afford to lose another colony. We're here to unify, not just to survive. If we can't pull this place together, the rest of humanity won't stand a chance." As the Horizon descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere, the landscape below became clear. A patchwork of burning cities, makeshift barricades, and desperate survivors. The once pristine world now resembled a war-torn hellscape. In the distance, she could see the faint silhouette of a Nixar warship, a reminder that the human struggle was far from over. "Prepare for landing," Valeria ordered, her eyes scanning the chaos below. "Lang, can you pinpoint the closest safe zone?" "There's a neutral zone," Lang replied, his voice uncertain. "A place where no faction has full control. But the risk is high." Valeria took one final steadying breath. "We have no choice. It's time for action. Prepare the landing party. This isn't just about saving Nova Terra anymore. It's about showing these people we're still human, that we can rise above the madness." The ship descended, and the crew braced for impact. As the landing gear hit the scarred earth, Valeria steeled herself for the challenge ahead. She wasn't just a captain anymore. She was humanity's last hope. And she wasn't about to let them fall apart now. The Horizon's engines thrummed steadily as it touched down on the war-ravaged surface of Nova Terra. The landing had been rough, the ship bouncing once as the terrain beneath them proved uneven, but it held firm. Valeria stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes focused on the dark landscape beyond the viewport. A thick cloud of smoke and ash hung in the air, swirling lazily in the cold winds. The planet was a fractured shell of its former self, its once thriving cities now reduced to burning ruins. It was hard to believe that just a few months ago, this world had been a beacon of humanity's expansion into the stars. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders as the Horizon's doors began to open with a deep mechanical hiss. The crew had made preparations for the landing, but the reality of stepping foot onto the war-torn soil was different from anything they had anticipated. The chaos on the planet's surface had to be met with resolve, and they needed allies. "Everyone, stay sharp," Valeria ordered as she stepped toward the exit. "We don't know who we can trust down there. This is a war zone, not a safe haven." She was met with nods from her crew as they followed her into the hangar. The air outside felt heavier than it should, the ash coating the planet's surface, adding an eerie stillness to the moment. The unmistakable sound of distant gunfire echoed in the background, reminding them that the fight was far from over. In the distance, Valeria could see the flashes of combat between human factions, fighting not just for survival, but for control of what little remained. "Captain, incoming transmission." Marek's voice crackled from the comms, drawing her attention back to the ship. "It's from Governor Merrick again. He's demanding we leave immediately." Valeria's lips tightened. Merrick's earlier warning hadn't been enough to deter her, and his frantic tone now only solidified her resolve. She motioned for Marek to patch the transmission through. "Horizon, this is Merrick." The voice was strained, a mixture of desperation and anger. "I told you, you're walking into a powder keg. These people are beyond saving. The Nixar are more than just invaders. They've embedded themselves deep within our ranks. You'll never find a way to unite these factions. This planet is lost." Valeria's gaze flicked toward her crew, but she knew what she had to do. "Merrick, we're already here, and we're not leaving until we see this through. If we don't act now, the Nixar will cling the last hope for humanity. We're not going to let that happen." There was a long pause, the static-filled silence dragging on for a few moments. Finally, Merrick spoke again, his voice quieter but still tinged with fear. "You've sealed your fate, Captain. Be careful who you trust down there. If you're not careful, you'll become part of the war itself." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Valeria with nothing but the grim reminder of the state of the world she had just landed on. She could almost hear the war drums in the distance as she turned toward the airlock. "Let's move out," Valeria said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Lang Marek, you're with me. We'll head to the neutral zone. We need to make contact with anyone who still believes in unity." The airlock hissed open, and Valeria stepped into the chaos beyond, her boots crunching against the broken earth. The air was thick with the stench of burning debris, and the faint smell of ozone from weaponized energy blasts lingered in the atmosphere. She adjusted her tactical vest, the weight of her gear a constant reminder of the danger they were walking into. "We need to move fast," Lang muttered as they navigated through the ruined city outskirts. Gunfire crackled in the distance, and the low rumble of explosions reverberated through the air. They were heading into the heart of the conflict now. A group of armed figures appeared from behind a crumbled building, their weapons raised, suspicion in their eyes. For a moment, everything slowed, the tension thickening as both sides assessed one another. Valeria's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve never wavered. She wasn't here to fight, she was here to unite. "We come in peace," Valeria called out, raising a hand to signal her intentions. "We're not here to take sides. We need your help to defeat the Nixar, or we'll all fall." The figures hesitated, eyes narrowing before one of them, a woman with a hardened face and a scar running across her cheek, stepped forward. "You're the one from the horizon," she said, her voice low and cautious. "The captain who's trying to rally what's left of humanity." Valeria nodded. "That's right. We don't have time for this. If we don't unite, we'll lose Nova Terra to the Nixar and to ourselves. We need a coalition." The woman's eyes flicked to the others, who remained tense but didn't lower their weapons. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with skepticism. "We've been fighting each other for months. I don't know if you can change that." "We can't do this alone," Valeria replied, her tone unwavering. "But together, we stand a chance. Help me convince your people. Help me give humanity one last chance to rise." The woman studied Valeria for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Fine, but don't think it'll be easy. There's more than just the Nixar to deal with down here." Valeria exhaled, her mind already working. She had taken the first step. Now she just needed to keep moving forward, no matter how impossible it seemed. Time was running out. The small band of survivors, led by the woman with the scarred face, moved swiftly through the shattered city, weaving through the wreckage of collapsed buildings and abandoned vehicles. The sense of urgency weighed heavily on Valeria as she took each step, knowing the window of opportunity was closing fast. She could feel the tension in the air, as if the entire planet held its breath, waiting for someone to take control of its destiny. The remnants of human civilization on Nova Terra were fractured beyond recognition, yet somewhere in the heart of that chaos there was a glimmer of hope. The woman who had stepped forward, the one who seemed to be a leader among the group, glanced over her shoulder at Valeria. "I'm Captain Elise Torres," she said, her voice low, but it carried a weight of authority. "This way. The others are waiting." Valeria nodded, her eyes scanning the surroundings. Elise's group moved with the practiced caution of soldiers, and Valeria couldn't help but respect their survival instincts. She had seen it all too often, people desperate for survival, willing to do anything to protect what little they had left. It was the same across the galaxy, but here, on Nova Terra, there was something different. The war had stripped away the luxuries of spacefaring life, revealing the raw, primal instincts beneath. They made their way to a crumbled plaza, where the remnants of human buildings still stood, surrounded by makeshift barricades. In the center of the plaza was a small group of survivors, each one bearing the marks of constant conflict. Dirt-streaked faces, torn clothing, weapons slung across their backs, and eyes that had seen too much. But there was one thing that stood out to Valeria: unity. Despite the signs of wear and tear, these people were standing together, not as factions, but as survivors. "This is the Neutral Council," Elise said, gesturing to the group. "We represent all factions, or at least what's left of them. We know the situation, and we know we can't fight the Nixar without working together." Valeria stepped forward, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm Captain Valeria Stone of the Horizon. We've come to ask for your help. The Nixar are hunting us, but they're hunting you too. This planet, this colony, can still be saved. But only if we stop fighting each other and unite. The galaxy is watching us. We're humanity's last stand." The leader of the Neutral Council, a tall man with a grizzled beard and piercing eyes, raised a brow at Valeria's words. "You're asking us to unite when our homes, our families, are dead or scattered across the galaxy?" he asked, his voice rough, but not unkind. "You're asking for the impossible." "I know it's difficult," Valeria replied, her voice unwavering. "But think of the alternative. The Nixar are relentless. If we don't fight together, they'll burn everything we fought for. We've seen it already. Earth is gone. The colonies are next. If you don't trust me, then trust this. There is no future in division. We have one shot at this, and I'm asking you to take it." A murmur passed through the council members, a mix of skepticism and contemplation. Elise stepped forward, her gaze hard but determined. "I'm willing to take that chance," she said, her voice carrying conviction. "We've been fighting ourselves for too long. It's time we start fighting for something bigger." The grizzled man hesitated, his eyes scanning the group before finally nodding. "All right, Stone. I'll give you a chance. But it's not just the Nixar we're fighting. It's ourselves. We'll need something more than words." Valeria could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she didn't falter. "I have the Horizon," she said, "and we have weapons, supplies, and a crew ready to fight. But we need a place to start, somewhere to rally the remaining factions. We need a symbol of unity." Ellis glanced at the other council members, and after a long moment she nodded. "There's a base on the far side of the planet. It was an old military facility before the Nixar hit us. It's mostly abandoned now, but there's enough there to make a stand." "That's where we'll start," Valeria said, her voice steady, but her heart raced with anticipation. "Gather what forces you can. We'll meet there in 24 hours. As the meeting broke up and the survivors scattered to make preparations, Valeria lingered in the plaza, taking a moment to absorb the enormity of what she had just set into motion. It wasn't just about the horizon anymore. It wasn't just about saving Nova Terra. This was a last-ditch effort to keep humanity from splintering into irrelevance. This was a fight for survival, for the future of every human colony in the galaxy. She knew the stakes had never been higher. Lang approached her from behind, his voice low. "Do you think they'll come around?" Valeria's eyes swept over the people, now gathered and preparing for the next phase of the fight. "They have to. They will. We have no choice. If we don't pull this off, there's no more humanity. Not as we know it." She turned to face him, her jaw set with determination. "We don't fight just to survive, Lang. We fight to rebuild, to rise again." Lang nodded, his expression a mix of uncertainty and hope. "Then let's get to work." As Valeria walked toward the meeting point, her mind raced ahead. The road to unification would be long and filled with obstacles. But this was her duty, to lead, to unite, to ensure that humanity's flame didn't die in the ashes of a broken world. The storm was gathering, and Valeria Stone was ready to face it head-on. The next 24 hours felt like an eternity. Valeria's every waking moment was spent preparing for the battle ahead, coordinating with the Lace's group, organizing the meager resources they had, and above all, trying to ensure the survival of the fragile coalition they had just formed. The Neutral Council had agreed to the plan, but trust was still thin, and there was a palpable sense of unease. Unity was a fragile thing, especially on a planet as fractured as Nova Terra. As dawn broke over the war-ravaged landscape, Valeria stood at the command console of the horizon, gazing out over the smoky horizon. The planet's scarred surface seemed to stretch endlessly before her, with plumes of fire rising in the distance. What had once been a beacon of human potential now felt like a dying ember, its light fading with each passing day. But she wasn't about to let that happen. Not while she still had breath in her body. "Captain, we're ready to move." Lang's voice broke her reverie. He stood by her side, his expression as tense as hers. Valeria nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Good. Let's make sure they're ready too." She turned away from the viewport, her steps measured as she crossed the bridge toward the exit. The atmosphere was thick with urgency, and the crew moved with a quiet efficiency that Valeria had come to respect. They had seen the destruction the Nixar had wrought. They had fought to survive, and now they would fight for something more. Outside, the landscape of Nova Terra looked like a war zone. The remnants of once proud cities lay in ruins, and the air was heavy with the scent of smoke and charred earth. In the distance, the faint sound of battle could still be heard, but the alliance they had formed was about to make its first move. The small band of survivors from the Neutral Council, along with a handful of Horizon's crew, began their trek across the barren terrain. Ellis's voice crackled through their comms as she relayed orders to her faction's forces. "We move fast," she said. "We don't know how long we have before the Nixar send reinforcements. The military base is only 20 clicks away, but it might as well be a lifetime." Valeria felt the weight of that statement. Time was their enemy, and they were running out of it. But they couldn't afford to rush. Every step, every decision had to be calculated. The survival of Nova Terra, and perhaps humanity itself, rested on what happened next. As they approached the ruins of a former military outpost, the silence was deafening. No gunfire, no explosions, just an eerie calm that hung in the air. They were close now, and the base loomed ahead, partially buried under the rubble of collapsed structures. Lang was the first to speak, his voice tight with suspicion. Something's not right. This place should have been crawling with people. Valeria's brow furrowed as she scanned the area, her instincts on high alert. "Keep your guard up," she ordered. "This is too quiet. Let's move in, but cautiously." They proceeded in tight formation, every member of the group moving with practiced stealth, but the unease was palpable. Every broken window, every shattered wall seemed to hide an unseen threat. The base had once been a hub of military strength, but now it was little more than a graveyard for those who had fallen defending it. Suddenly, a faint sound reached their ears, scraping, metal against stone. It was the unmistakable sound of movement. Valeria's pulse quickened. "Contact," she whispered into the comms. Without warning, a figure stepped from behind a shattered pillar, his rifle raised. A tense silence fell over the group as the man's eyes locked onto Valeria's. He was older, grizzled, his face hardened by battle, but there was no mistaking the wariness in his gaze. "Hold your fire," Valeria called out, stepping forward. She didn't recognize him, but the way he held his rifle, almost as if he'd seen too many wars, told her everything she needed to know. The man lowered his weapon slightly, but his stance remained tense. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice rough. "We're here to help," Valeria replied, her voice steady. "We've come to unite the factions. The Nixar are coming for us all." His eyes narrowed. "I've heard that line before," he muttered, but there was no malice in his tone, only wariness. Another false hope. Another leader promising salvation. "I'm not here to make promises," Valeria said, her voice sharp with the urgency of the moment. "I'm here to give you a chance to survive, to fight back." The man studied her for a long moment before lowering his rifle completely. "I've seen too many die for too little," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I'll hear you out. For now." Valeria nodded, turning toward the others. "Set up a perimeter. We need to secure this base now." As the survivors spread out to fortify their position, Valeria felt the weight of the moment settle over her. They had gained a foothold, but it was only the beginning. The Nixar would be coming, and when they did, the final test would come for Nova Terra. The storm was closing in, but Valeria wasn't backing down. She never would. The military base was eerily quiet, but every creaking wall and shifting shadow felt like a prelude to the storm that was about to hit. The survivors, including the hardened soldiers from the Neutral Council, moved quickly to reinforce the perimeter, securing entry points and setting up makeshift defenses. Valeria, her pulse steady but her mind racing, surveyed the scene, trying to prepare herself for the battle that was inevitably coming. The man who had greeted them at the base, now known as Captain Victor Harker, had reluctantly agreed to join their cause, but his skepticism was palpable. His people had fought for survival for too long, and hope was a currency that had run dry. Still, he had seen enough of Valeria's resolve to trust her, at least for now. She couldn't afford to let that trust waver. "Harker, what's the status of the base?" Valeria asked, her voice calm but demanding. Harker glanced around the base, his eyes narrowing as he studied their makeshift defenses. "It's not much, but it'll have to do. We've got a few turrets left, but they're in bad shape. We'll need to manually power them up. If the Nixar are coming, we don't have time to waste." "I'll have my crew assist," Valeria said, her tone firm. "We can get those turrets online. We'll hold this place, no matter what. Focus on their mechs. Aim for the joints, the weak points. We can't let them get close." The first wave of Nixar soldiers advanced, their biomechanical armor glinting in the dim light, their faces emotionless behind their helmeted visors. The human soldiers manning the base's defenses fired in unison, striking the alien troops with deadly precision, but they were outnumbered. The Nixar infantry surged forward, their alien weapons crackling with lethal energy. Valeria gritted her teeth, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She could see it now. This was the final test. She wasn't just fighting for Nova Terra anymore. She was fighting for every last human colony across the galaxy. She could feel the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on her, and it pushed her forward, giving her strength. "Lang!" she shouted into the comms. "Get to the command center now. I need you to reroute the power to the main gate. Hold them off long enough for us to get the reinforcements through." Lang's voice crackled back, tense but focused. "Got it, Captain. We're on it." Valeria didn't hesitate. She dashed forward, gunfire and explosions raging around her, her boots pounding the ground as she led the charge. The human resistance was fierce, their determination palpable. But the Nixar were relentless, their superior numbers and technology overwhelming. Valeria knew the only chance they had was to stay united, to fight with every ounce of strength they had left. As she pushed forward, her eyes locked on the enemy's battle mechs, massive, towering machines that seemed impervious to the human weapons. But Valeria had a plan. She sprinted toward a fallen Nixar soldier, grabbing his weapon from the ground, a powerful anti-mech rifle. She swung it into position, steadying her aim on the nearest mech's vulnerable underbelly. Targeting weak point, she muttered to herself, pulling the trigger. A powerful blast erupted from the weapon, sending shockwaves through the air. The shot landed squarely on the mech's joint, and the massive machine staggered, its movements sluggish. A moment of hope sparked in Valeria's chest as the mech's systems began to falter. She fired again, this time aiming for the power core on its back. The mech's entire frame shook as it let out a mechanical roar, then crumpled to the ground, its once imposing form now nothing more than a pile of wreckage. Direct hit. "We've got one down," Valeria shouted, her voice filled with both disbelief and triumph. "Keep targeting the joints. We can bring them down." The survivors rallied, their spirits lifting at the sight of one of the Nixar's towering mechs falling. But the battle wasn't over yet. More Nixar soldiers and mechs poured onto the base, their numbers seemingly endless. And just when Valeria thought they were gaining ground, the sound of incoming fire grew louder. A massive dark shape appeared above the base, the flagship of the Nixar fleet. It was colossal, its hull bristling with weapons, and it hovered ominously above the battlefield, unleashing devastating blasts of energy. "No, they're deploying their flagship," Lang's voice crackled in her ear. "We need to act now, or we'll be wiped out." Valeria's heart skipped a beat. The flagship was the Nixar's most advanced weapon, and it had the firepower to decimate everything they had built. But there was no time to waste on fear. "Prepare the last line of defense," she barked, her voice resolute. "We take down that ship, or we die trying." She turned to Elise, who was organizing a final wave of resistance. "Gather your forces. We're going in. Everyone else, cover us. We're taking that ship down." Without another word, Valeria led the charge, rallying the remaining forces into a final assault. They made their way toward the base's central command, where an old ion cannon was stored. one of the few remaining heavy weapons capable of piercing the Nixar flagship's shields. But as they neared the cannon's storage, Valeria saw something that nearly stopped her in her tracks. The Nixar flagship unleashed a massive blast, and in the blink of an eye, it tore through one of the defensive walls, sending a shockwave of debris flying through the air. Valeria dove to the ground, narrowly avoiding the blast. She could hear the cries of her crew and allies, the sounds of the battle growing even more intense. She forced herself to her feet, her pulse thundering in her ears. "Captain, we've got to move. Now," Lang shouted, his voice full of urgency. Valeria nodded, her eyes burning with determination. This was the moment, the final chance. "Cover the cannon," she ordered. "We end this now." With everything they had left, the human survivors launched their last assault, firing the ion cannon toward the flagship. The blast tore through the air, striking the Nixar ship squarely in its shield array. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, the flagship's shields flickered, crackled, and collapsed. Valeria's heart soared. They had done it. The enemy flagship was vulnerable. With one final rallying cry, Valeria led the charge to finish what they had started. For Nova Terra. For humanity. And with that, the Nixar's hold on the galaxy began to crumble.